Welcome to The Grounded Leader, Ayurvedic wellness for leaders who want to succeed from a place of balance. A podcast where ancient practices meet ambitious goals to help you operate with strength, clarity, and grounded intention. I'm your host, Shweta Vikram, an Ayurvedic doctor, trauma informed yoga teacher, award winning author, mindfulness coach, corporate wellness speaker, adjunct professor, and a lifelong student of what it really means to lead with clarity, purpose, and peace. Each week, we'll explore holistic wellness, how to excel in authentic leadership, and live with balance and purpose. Let's dive in. Loss cracks us open, but it can also awaken something profoundly human in us. In this heartfelt episode, I sit down with Reshma Kearney, a trauma informed yoga teacher and healing guide who helps individuals and families navigate life after loss. After losing her husband to suicide in 2022, Reshma turned to mindfulness and movement as lifelines in her own healing. Today, she leads healing circles for those walking the difficult path of grief, creating compassionate spaces for remembrance, release, and renewal. Oh, this is so profound to me. To me, she's a real leader, helping her children, family, and communities grieve and heal with compassion. Together, we explore how grief can become a teacher, guiding us towards deeper self awareness, tenderness, and purpose. This conversation invites listeners to reframe grief not as an endpoint, but as a bridge to healing, connection, and strength. Welcome to the Grounded Leader, Reshma. I am so thrilled and so humbled that you've joined us today because I'm a big
Um,
fan of the beautiful work that you do.
I appreciate that so much, Shweta. I'm honored to be here. I feel the same way about you, and that was a beautiful introduction. So thank you so much. I'm inspired by you all the time, your work and your grief awareness, your story, your Ayurveda practices. So I'm truly grateful to be here.
Thank you. I think we'll keep this mutual admiration stuff going on separately in a different conversation, but
Yeah.
I'm going to dive directly into grief, Reshma. And from what I've seen you, the way I see you on social media, and it's something that I've always admired, there's a lot of poise. So I apologize for jumping deep into grief, like right after a little after that we shared, but I trust you so much with how you handle it. And so, what I wanted to ask you was, can you take us back to that moment when grief first became a part of your story? And like, how did it begin to shape your path forward?
Yeah. So that's actually a big question because the public, social media and my circles and you know of one grief story, and that is the story about my husband dying by suicide in 2022. But
Right.
what a lot of people don't realize is that I have a grief story that began many years before that.
Oh,
Um, I had a daughter who was stillborn when I was 30 weeks pregnant with her.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm saying it's been on my mind because this month is Infant and Pregnancy Loss Awareness Month, October. October 30th was the day that her heart stopped beating.
Mhm.
And I talk about it because it was grief, but I didn't have the language for it at the time. I didn't know. I didn't really understand what grief meant, and I didn't know that that was grief. And because it was more of what I call a silent grief,
Right.
not very many people knew. Maybe people didn't really connect to that because they had never met the baby or seen a baby in my arms. And so it's very easy to disconnect from that emotionally, energetically.
Right.
And then 12 years later, I lost my husband, and that's something the world learns immediately, right? And so I'm just bringing that up to bring awareness to the fact that a lot of times we have experienced grief and started a grief journey long before we even realize that that's what it was all along. So yeah, and I think that has started to shape kind of how I see grief now and the way I approach grief work. Just knowing that we don't really know what people have been through, even when you think you know everything there is to know, we
Right.
don't know. Yeah.
I love that. Firstly, I'm sorry about your baby girl. And I'm getting goosebumps and I'm never at a loss of words. And you have so much grace with which you show up to help others. And it's even though it's 12 years apart, I'm no one can understand grief until they are in it, is what I believe. And every grief is so different.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean the degree of impact. It's just so different and it's so
Hmm.
monumental in its own way. Everything changes. And the griever can never be prepared, right? Because firstly, unless you're dealing with someone where you there is anticipatory grief, like, oh, this
Hmm.
might happen, or this one might pass away, or whatever have you. I don't think even in those situations when I talk to people, grief is still very much with them. So
Hmm.
because you touched upon the loss 12 years ago and then losing your husband in 2022, how has your understanding of grief evolved during the process?
Well, I think I've just learned now that it's forever,
Mm.
that it stays with you forever. I think that, um, you know, almost 15 years ago, um, I understood grief or sadness after loss to be something that was temporary, that you just move through. And maybe for me, having three healthy kids after that loss, I thought, okay, this is when grief ends, right? Because now I've I don't want to say replaced, but you've still gotten what you had hoped for in life. But I now understand that grief is forever, and it's just that you learn how to carry it over time.
Wow. And that is so true. And which brings me to what I've been thinking about a lot in the spaces that I work, which is leaders and I think we've talked about this before. I think a mom is the biggest leader. It's the first leader we meet in our lives. Nothing
Hmm.
against dad. I was a daddy's girl. I always will be. But moms are the true leaders. But even in the professional sense, I know I've dealt with grief. I know other colleagues, friends, and family members. And then people just show up to work, their families, their responsibilities with this thousand bag, invisible bag of unaddressed grief. Oftentimes, there's no space available for them to share their grief. There is also the gender bias of how men need to be stoic. And if a woman talks too much, like you need to get over it. And
Hmm.
oftentimes people have been told where, there are these impressions or stereotypes around grief. One is it comes with a timeline. And you said that so beautifully, like it's forever. We
Hmm.
just learn to carry the load a little differently. But there are enough times where I've heard people say, oh, now it's been 3 months. So it's like time to move on. And how can one person tell another person without really being privy to what that grief or absence means to them, right? So given the work that you do, given the communities that you help, can you speak to us about how can we reframe it as something that can help us grow grief, right? In both our personal and professional lives, as opposed to neatly folding it up, thinking it's in a tidy corner, and one day it explodes in our face.
Yeah, I think that it's important for people to understand that it's just there forever. Like I said, that there's no end point, there's no finish line, and most importantly, there's no room for comparison and grief. Like you've touched on, there's no looking at somebody else's journey and thinking, oh, wow, they've been through something very similar to me, but they seem to be doing better, or I seem to be doing better, or we need to be at this place by this date. I think once you just accept that grief is now a part of you, it makes healing so much easier because there's no more pressure now. You can give yourself grace to understand that it's a part of you. And if it's a part of you, like the shirt I'm wearing, well, then I can still go through the day and appreciate, the flowers outside my house. I can appreciate the warm cup of tea. I can laugh at a joke my kid tells me, right? And
Right.
this is still here. My grief is still here, but I'm allowed to keep living life. And both grief and joy, pain and sadness can be a part of it all, and that's okay.
I love that. And in fact, I was talking to a friend just last evening, and I said to her, I think my life is, I always carry, the proportion might differ on a given day,
Hmm.
happiness and sadness with me. Like
Hmm.
Diwali just happened, and it's not
Hmm.
that you're feeling only joy. You are missing your loved ones. And no matter what the holiday, no matter the race, the ethnicity, the culture, the religion, everyone has that story. And I love that what you said is acknowledging the wholesomeness of what grief presents itself like. So, but in your practice, that is how you navigate grief. But when you hold these healing circles or when you offer one-on-one consulting, and all the details about this will be in the show notes. So if you're looking for help, please reach out to Reshma. What kind of misconceptions do you encounter around grief and healing?
Yeah, I think we've touched on a lot of them. That there's an end point that you should get over it. I've heard a lot from people that I fear that if I find joy or if I start traveling again, or maybe even for someone who loses a partner, if I get into a relationship again, I fear that I'm no longer honoring my loved one, or that people will see this as me moving on.
Mhm.
And so I think, you know, just in my circles and even in my one-on-one work, um, I'm very mindful about creating a compassionate and non-judgmental space and just allowing the person on the other end truly share in an authentic way without fearing judgment or fixing.
Wow, I love that. And I kind of had a feeling, we touched upon people saying there's a timeline, but like get over it. You are so aware of it because of the work that you do. I'm aware of it because of the work that
Mhm.
I do. And but it's interesting when people come in, it's things that you educate them about might be just so simple and basic,
Mhm.
but they must feel heard and like, okay, it's not just me. Somebody else felt guilty too just because they
Mhm.
laughed this Christmas.
Yeah.
You know, so something that we were talking about is you do teach yoga, you're a certified yoga teacher. And from an Ayurvedic perspective, we apply opposite qualities. So, what I mean by that is grief is heavy. It pulls
Mhm.
you down. No one says, yeah, I'm sad, right?
Mm.
It's a very
Mhm.
downward, heavy energy. It's very sticky. So we apply the opposite qualities. One of the things I tell my clients is move. You don't have
Mhm.
to like it, but we don't need
Mhm.
to ask you everything that you want because right now it's habits over motivation, right? So one of the simple things I'll tell them is just go for a walk. And it
Mhm.
really intrigued me because movement is something you promote and suggest in your healing work. So can you speak a little bit about how movement and mindfulness, why you recommend them for grievers, and how does it help us reconnect? The parts we lose to grief and like how do they work?
Yeah. But well, grief has a way of kind of pulling you outside of your body.
Mm,
I've described different milestones where I've really felt like I was having an outer body experience. I did not feel grounded in the moment. And I think that movement and mindfulness help you reconnect with your body and your mind. It helps you um, really get to learn your grief. And you can't begin to heal until you learn about your own grief, because that's when you learn about what it is you're feeling, what it is you need, more of or less of. Your body and your heart speak to you in those quiet moments of meditation or breath work. And the movement, emotions are energy, right? And so, like you said, grief is heaviness. And, you talked about balance. In yoga, we learn that you have, your high energy and then you have your low energy, and you want to live in balance. And so when I know for me personally, when I'm feeling very heavy or overwhelmed, just going outside and moving that energy around is always so helpful for me to ground myself. And it's science backed, right? We know based on science that even 10 minutes outside moving your body and taking in the sights of nature, maybe touching nature is so grounding.
That's fair. And I also feel like it's such a good distraction. Sometimes we have to trick our mind because if we allow it to, it'll tell you stories that might not even be true.
Hmm.
And then you get stuck. At least I know that for myself. Like I can get stuck in that emotional space. And then I
Hmm.
add a little bit of physics, a little bit of Ayurveda, and I go for even a 20-minute, like you said, be out in nature. I live in the city. So it could be somebody screaming around the street corner, but I'm distracted. And
Hmm.
all of a sudden, it's not about me or what I'm going through, and not to diminish what I'm going through. But you start to see a larger picture, which is the world.
Yeah. And I think, when you say distracted, I know what you mean, but I think somebody who's new to grief might think distract means um to pull yourself away from the grief and find something to um kind of shut the grief off or shut the emotions off. So, I would clarify that it's not necessarily that you're shutting emotions
Right.
off when you're taking those breaks, but you are, yes, distracting yourself in a sense that like you're not sitting in the past and you're not thinking about the future. You're bringing yourself back to the present moment. So, and when you bring yourself back to the present moment, you're not brushing the emotions to the side because it's so important that we learn how to sit with the emotions. That's where we do the learning about our grief and the processing and the healing. But yeah, I agree. We don't want to stay in the day we lost them or how much our life has changed or how much we've changed. And we also don't want to constantly be thinking about how different the future's going to look.
Right.
It's all about being in the present moment. And that's what mindfulness is.
Absolutely. And that's why you do what you do so beautifully. Thank you for reframing it the way you understood what I meant. But
Hmm.
you're right. For someone who's new to it, I'm so deep in the work and I know how deep you are in your work. It was just, but like the whole point is
Hmm.
of how do we stay in the present moment? That's where healing happens. That's
Hmm.
where, yoga is chitti vitti nirodha. It's the stillness of
Yeah.
the thoughts. And grief can do, it's just the opposite. There is no stillness. And
Hmm.
like you said, there's so much of tug of war, pull and push towards directions that we have zero control over.
Hmm.
I wanted to talk about grief. It's a loaded way of asking this, so I'll preface it with my story. What I mean
Hmm.
by that is, I've lost my parents pretty early on. Then my dad and my father-in-law passed away within 2 days of each other. Again, both unexpected losses. But what that has done is, again, because of the practices, the work, and there's so much, and the work is until my last breath, right? Like it never really stops.
Hmm.
I realized grief also gave me a deeper sense of purpose.
Hmm.
I live with a sense of urgency, and that doesn't mean fear. That doesn't mean anxiety. That doesn't mean sadness. It's an urgency where I don't want to just keep saying yes to things if they don't align with my truth.
Hmm.
I every day, and not an over evaluation, but it's given me the sense of like asking about my dharma, my purpose, like what am I doing? And what has that been for you? Like, has grief motivated you in any way?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that it's not only motivated me, but it's really taught me to embrace life more fully
Mm.
and to embrace, connection, community, love, presence more fully. And I often say that I went through a tragedy. This was a tragedy for me and my family. It was the worst thing I could have ever imagined happening to our family. And here we are on the other side. And I'm not saying that on the other side means we've gotten through it. We are going through it, but we are now on a much brighter side of some of our very darkest moments. And I believe that it's almost my duty to now help others who are where we were 3 years ago. Because otherwise, what was this all for? You know, not only is my work and my sharing honoring my husband and setting a beautiful example for my kids, but I'm bringing meaning to the tragedy and meaning to the loss in the way that feels right for me. And that's not to say that everybody has to go and do grief work after they've lost a loved one, or, like I read somewhere, you don't have to write a book. It's like we don't have to do anything, but this is what feels right for me. And so I do agree. It's a huge motivator in my life right now.
And I love everything about all the stuff that you're saying, but just this reminder to people to not take on that pressure, because
Mhm.
we all navigate grief differently and we'll all find different outlets. My dad was my buddy, and he would tell me, and I never thought I'd end up writing The Loss That Binds Us, because he would always tell me, we need to normalize grief. We don't talk about grief. And I say, what is wrong with you, Dad? Why do you want to talk about this? And so, the when you said like it's making sense and also honoring those we've lost. And in doing that work, it's also, when you find yourself in situations like this, there is a lot of good material out there. But then oftentimes you also feel like there are people who say, I went through something, now I'm on the other side. I love the candidness or the transparency with which you shared. Like it's still going through.
Mhm.
And so work yours like yours is so important because it tells people we don't just wake up and we are not on the other side. It's daily work. Some days you might just take 5 steps back. But if you remember to take half a step forward the next day, it's so important. And again, that's why I think it's so powerful to heal in community. And
Mhm.
what's been your experience with it? Given that you run healing circles, what does that
Mhm.
look like?
Oh yeah, community is healing. Grief is very isolating. And when you hear even one other person say, I get that,
Right.
it it opens something up in you. I mean, to feel seen and not alone. There's something so powerful in that. And I've seen that in my current healing circles, which are for survivors of suicide loss, because the grief that comes after suicide loss is just as complex as the grief, as the loss itself.
Mm,
There is uncertainty, fear, panic, doubt, guilt, anger, relief. I mean, just this whole range of emotions that come with the grief after suicide loss. And you can't understand that unless you have lost someone to suicide. And I've seen that in my groups. People feel so comforted in knowing that they're not the only one.
wow. So from what I'm hearing is this is a safe space for people to come share their stories, to feel visible and feel heard. And then so it's almost like you're honoring both their pain and resilience.
Mhm.
And so after that, can they sign up for a one-on-one with you, or that's a separate conversation?
Yeah, I'm always open to booking, one-on-one clients. I usually have a connection call with people when they're interested.
Right.
So yeah, I think there's so much intersection in all the things that I'm doing right now. And I like that because it keeps it different every day. And so I do one-on-one work and then I have the healing circles. I'm really hoping that I can get a teens group started next spring. I had
Amazing.
started one this year, but couldn't fill that, and I'm hoping to do that next spring. And I work with kids locally, teaching yoga and mindfulness, because I think having the tools are is very important, whether you've been through loss or not.
Absolutely. And whether we like it or not, grief is so humbling and it touches every family, every home. And where for people who, some people just don't know how to respond to someone else's grief. And that's one thing. But then there are people who think they know it all and they're like, yeah, move on, next thing. And all I pray for them is, see, it's going to hit you too. No, and you don't know how and when and how often. So if you don't know, be that person saying, I don't know what to do. I've had friends who've reached out to me. I don't know what to say. And I was like, your silence is the best form of support I need right now. And also,
Mhm.
I love what you said, from your healing circles, it's almost the connection call. And if someone wants to, if it feels like a good fit for both parties, there's a one-on-one because not everyone will be open to public share.
Yeah.
Right? And grief is so personal. And like you said, there's so many emotions. Depending on the emotion you're navigating on a certain day, you don't, you, because grief also tells you, oh my God, there is a Jekyll and Hyde in all of us.
Hmm.
Right. And if the
Hmm.
dark side is out that day, I know for sure I don't want to open myself up to strangers or the people I know. It's something that I just need to navigate through. So, for those of you listening, know this option is available of joining Reshma's healing circle and then, the option to connect for a more intimate and healing
Hmm.
conversation where you're it's intimate, you're still heard and visible, but you also feel free to share what you're navigating. So, Reshma, one last question before we wrap up this conversation. It's going to be so helpful to so many people, and I love that you're offering, support system, building that for the or launching that in spring for teens as well, because we think, oh, that's a kid, they'll get over it, and
Hmm.
we don't treat them as living, breathing human beings when it comes to grief. When it comes to pampering children as a society, the human race is really good, but not when it comes to difficult questions. So it's incredible. Look her up if you're looking for local classes in her area, which is in the West Coast. Again, all the information will be in the show notes, so please do look her up. But Reshma, one last question for someone who's listening and who's in deep grief right now, what's that one small, accessible step they can take today to begin tending to their heart?
Take a few deep breaths.
Mm,
That's what I would say. Take a few deep breaths and just sit quietly, even 1 minute of quiet stillness, breath awareness can give you a beautiful opportunity to really listen to your heart
mm.
and to know what it is that your body and heart need in that moment.
I love that. And you have that poise in your voice. So I totally believe what you said. Like, when you take a pause, take a breath. I took a breath. Um,
Good.
it's so it's such a reminder. There's are things that we do intuitively and then we forget when it comes
Mhm.
to bigger life situations. I might be so good with reminding my clients to do that, but the minute you said take a few deep breaths, I was like, oh yeah, that just it feels so centering. So thank you so much, Reshma. Grief
Thank
has a
you.
way of reshaping us, as we know. It cracks us open, but it also invites us to grow in ways we never thought was possible. As Reshma reminded us, healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to live with loss, love, and gratitude all at once. You can connect with Reshma Kearney through the links in the show notes and get to know more about her work. And if you've ever felt the weight of loss or wanted to better support someone who has, my book, The Loss That Binds Us, offers a compassionate, culturally grounded, and deeply personal path forward. It's part memoir, unfortunately, part guide, an exploration of how grief shapes us, connects us, and ultimately how we can learn to live alongside it without being consumed by it. You can order a copy where books are sold. If you found value in this episode, please take a moment to follow the show, leave a review, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that healing and hope can coexist. It helps us keep having these real human conversations. Until next time, take care of yourself and remember your vulnerability isn't a weakness, it's your greatest strength.